welcome everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Lean In Olympia. My name is Reverend Corey Passons. It's great to be with you today. I'm here with Interfaith Works and just want to do a brief introduction of the organization and myself. I work in the program management part for Interfaith Relations for Interfaith Works. We are a coalition of 30 plus diverse interfaith, spiritual, and religious communities. We are also Thurston County's largest provider, social service provider for vulnerable homeless adults experiencing homelessness. This show is a bi-weekly live show on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. And it's a show that features conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief. And if you want to check out past episodes, we are pretty much current at this point on our website at interfaith-works.org. And you can check us out also on the Facebook page and our YouTube channel. It's a joy to be here with you today and a joy to introduce Dr. Edward Donalson. Greetings, Dr. Donalson. Good to see you.
Greetings. Good to see you, Corey.
Yeah, I wish we could be in person. Someday we'll do that again. It's been a while since I've seen you, and I'll do a brief introduction from your bio, and then we can move toward you telling your story. So as an introduction, our guest today is Dr. Edward Donalson, who is an author, entrepreneur, thought coach, and a bishop. Born in Philadelphia and cultivated in Seattle as a bi-coastal youth, he developed a heart for diversity and an ability to navigate all socioeconomic, educational, and ethnic spheres. Dr. Donalson has authored over 7 books and currently serves as a faculty fellow in the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement and is the director of the Doctor of Ministry program and an assistant clinical professor in the School of Theology and Ministry within Seattle University, which is my alma mater and where we met over the years, I believe like 2013 to 2016. Yeah. He's also the senior pastor of the Kingdom Family Worship Center International in Kent and is the current president of the United Ecumenical College of Bishops, which we'll talk about in a bit. And he also serves on the City of Kent Community Police Race Relations Task Force. So among much more that could be posted on that bio. So we thank you for taking some time today to be with us. And it's really good to see you and to spend some time with you today. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm amazing and happy to be with you today.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, could we start with just how long were you in Philadelphia and tell us about those years before you were bicoastal?
Sure. I was born and raised in Philadelphia until the age of about 8 years old. And my father was an air traffic controller for Boeing, Vertol Division, which was the helicopter division in Pennsylvania, which shut down. And then in his search for employment and wanting to stay in the Boeing Corporation, it led us here to Washington, where we became quite bicoastal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how long was that then?
Well, I come from a very large family. And so I did school here. And then all breaks and everything was on the East Coast until I was about 16.
Okay. And are you from a family that grew up in the church? Did you grow up in the church? It's such a big part of your life now.
Yes, I actually pastor the church that my father founded. So I come from a long line of pastors and preachers, and we just did a summer series for a cousin of mine who is leading a work in Philadelphia. And he did a summer series every Friday night. He had a family member preach for the entire summer. So,
oh my gosh.
So that gives you a clue about how many preachers there are in my family at this time.
Wow.
And he didn't get through all the preachers.
Did you participate?
I did.
Okay.
Friday night. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So given that lineage, did you have self-awareness of that, or did you feel pressure or excitement as you understood this lineage that you were standing in?
You know, it very much depends on what era you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. There was pressure in some moments and excitement in other moments. But I have always loved the church. Whether I wanted to lead in the church or not was a different story, but I've never had a time in my life where I wasn't absolutely passionately in love with the Lord's church.
Mm-hmm. However, what tell us about those moments when you did have either ambivalence or maybe even resistance to leadership and ministry, because as you said, those are two very different things. To participate and to lead. How were those times for you when you were sensing perhaps resistance or maybe enthusiasm for that?
I think as all teenagers go through the vicissitudes of life and kind of trying to figure out their own identity and carve their own path, there's always a bit of a pushback against, I guess, what is normative in one's family of origin, and just wanting to kind of explore the world on one's own terms. And I think I went through a period of that, a brief period of that in maybe my late teens. But for the most part, I never saw it as burdensome. I just saw it perhaps as not the path that I wanted.
So then you're referencing the late teens. Was there a time in that space where you started to transition toward leadership in the church?
Well, I started preaching fairly young. I was a young preacher. And so I think leadership in the church found me before I found it. But probably in my very early 20s, I finally, I guess, embraced the role of leadership and the trajectory that would mean for me.
So what's the oldest archival footage of you preaching? Have you seen that?
I haven't. I don't know. I think there's some stuff out there on YouTube from around 2007, but by then, I mean, that was, we weren't big on, I guess, doing a lot of archival stuff. We should have been probably bigger, and most of what there would be might not even be video. It probably would be audio tape. So yeah, no, I haven't.
Well, it's interesting too, because later, and we'll get to your book that I was going to ask you about being a bishop. It seems to be one of the primary focuses of your book is to kind of share, that journey of what is a bishop, and from a perspective of it not always being outwardly expressed. So it's really interesting to see that parallel unfold.
Yeah, as you age, you start thinking about posterity and historicity, and I think one of the primary responsibilities of the bishopric is to be custodians of the history of the church and to tradition the church to the next generation. And it's very difficult to do in Western culture absent writing. So writing has become fundamental to my understanding of what it means to be a bishop in the 21st century, or really in any century. I mean, we're so thankful for Origen. We're so thankful for Tertullian and Polycarp and Athanasius and these writers. And we're thankful for James Cone, and we're thankful, right, for Mitzi Smith. And because what it does is it allows us to see the trajectory of the church, the history of the church, the conversation of the church set in particular time periods. So that as we face what we face in a modern context, we're not facing it on our own, but we're facing it with ancient traditions.
I think this is a good moment to segue toward that work, if you're willing to go there about being a bishop. We spoke yesterday, and one of the things I commented on is that the position of bishop, as you are in the African American Pentecostal tradition, might be lesser known or understood than some bishop expressions in other more mainline denominations. So I was wondering if you could take a moment and tell us about your position as a bishop, and if you could situate that in the African American Pentecostal tradition, and maybe start on a wider scale with the tradition itself, and then move towards your role.
Sure. I don't think that the African American Pentecostal episcopacy is much different than the episcopacy in other faith traditions. The bishop is the pastor of pastors. It's an administrative role. It functions in a long line of historical Episcopal traditions dating back pre-Rome, right? I think what we don't have is popes, although some folks function in the role as though it was a papacy. But I think that's a human condition and not particular to the function of a Pentecostal bishop. I think where the misunderstanding comes from is that for Pentecostals in general, specifically the bishopric, there is much more of a sense of call and invitation of the Spirit amongst the people in a very contemplative way, quite different traditionally than the voting process of some of our more mainline siblings. It seems to be this idea, he who desires the office of a bishop desires a good work. And for me, in that tradition, we go back to the Greek writing of that text, and that's not desire as in to want, because there is in the Greek language what is called a kai. The kai changes the entire tone and tenor of the writing, and what it really more accurately says is, he who is stretched out by God to the office of the bishop. And so what we tend to do is we look among the presbytery, among the pastors, among the elders, to see when there is a vacancy for further leadership, who it is that we feel, sense, know, and by examination of works, discern that God is inviting into a place of pastoring pastors, leading leaders, overseeing work, carving out new ministries. And so for us, it is much like the title of the book you're referencing. It is a contemplative process. It is really a prayerful consideration. Many times, senior bishops or presiding prelates will leave instruction to an organization or a body as to who their successor should be. And then there will be consensus to follow said instructions. So there are some nuances, but very much the role is quite similar to and akin to our more mainline siblings.
Can you describe the scope of the association in which you are a bishop?
So I'm a bishop in several associations. Funny thing there. In Pure Ministries, I serve as the Bishop of Operations of 27 churches that belong to that fellowship. I serve as the Dean of the College of Affirming Bishops and Faith Leaders. That number of churches I do not know off of the top of my head. And then for Freedom Assemblies Worldwide, that I am the presiding prelate, our local church that I pastor has birthed two churches out, one in Portland, Oregon, and one in San Francisco, California. So we oversee the West Coast for that. So I wear several hats, let's just say that.
Very many. Yeah. Thank you for that. And so this is really your sense of scope and scale stretches, it sounds like, regionally, at least as wide as the United States and perhaps farther. Is that right?
Globally.
Globally,
yeah. Because the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, or TFAM as it's known, has a Bishop of Global Engagement who also serves on the College of Affirming Bishops. So we have churches in Africa, we have churches in Europe, we have churches in Asia, we have churches, so it's a global span.
The book that we began to reference but didn't name it properly is a book that you wrote in 2014 called In My Own Words, The Contemplative Life of a 21st Century Bishop. And what I was reading in the description is that you are seeking to share some of the sense of call and office that you have as a bishop. Since that time, has anything changed for you that you would add to the book?
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that I would lean so much more heavily into the work of social justice as it relates to the role of a bishop in the 21st century. Without justice, there's no Jesus, and without Jesus, there's no justice. And I was trying to focus more on the academic conversation around contemplation, and I should have included something of praxis. So I probably would do a different run at social justice if talking about the life of a bishop or the role of a bishop now.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I've encountered since I've known you is really centered on that social justice piece. So when I saw the title of this book, I was really interested in how you understand a contemplative life in this modern world that's full of screens, distractions, timelines, deadlines, all of those things. And then this word contemplation comes in the midst of that. What does that look like to you in the 21st century?
In the 20th century, the Pentecostal movement really came into its maturation, particularly in the United States, but globally. And I come from a faith tradition known as the Church of God in Christ, a denomination known as the Church of God in Christ, which was founded by a man by the name of Bishop C.H. Mason. And Bishop Mason would sing a song. It was 2 words: yes, Lord. And after saying yes, Lord, for a while, it would become a 1-word song. Yes, yes, yes. Much like in other faith traditions, right? But that yes for us, we would still say in the 21st century, we are a yes, Lord church. That the call of contemplation is we say yes until the will of the Spirit is discerned in a moment. And we have to sit in that yes, right? That's the contemplative part. We'll sit with the yes until the yes tells us what the yes wants from us. So we look at a case like Michael Brown, and we see the injustice, and we see the uprising in Ferguson, and we see the response. And then we go on to George Floyd, and we go on to Breonna Taylor, and et cetera, et cetera. And we're still sitting in the yes. What is our response to this? Yes to the Spirit. Now, the Spirit might move us to pray with our feet, as Rabbi Abraham Heschel says. It may move us to march. It may move us to litigious responses. But whatever it is, it comes from that deep contemplation of my yes. What does my yes invite me to?
Yeah. We spoke yesterday about the book by Barbara Holmes, Joy Unspeakable, Contemplative Practices of the Black Church.
Yes, I have my copy right here now.
Oh, great. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. And I was looking at that, and one of the things that a quote that struck me was when she says that in the Black church, the contemplative experience is sought as an intense melding of spirit and body, an intense melding of spirit and body that changes both the life of the community and the individual.
It's true. And I like, from what I have read, we talked about this book yesterday, so I ordered it and it came, and I tried to do a little bit of catching up with you on that. What I like and want to lift is that the author understands clearly the Black church is not monolithic. And I think when dominant culture tends to reference the Black church, they tend to reference the Black church as though there are no nuances, much like dominant culture references the continent, right? Oh, African spirituality. Well, there is no African spirituality. Africa's a continent. There are African spiritualities. Much like there are multiple Christianities, right? Yes. There's no Christian way to be in the world. There are Christian ways of being. From the 1st century forward, that's what the Council of Jerusalem was all about in Acts 15, was trying to understand the ways in which folks function out their Christian faith. The Black church, like every church, is beyond monolithic description. So when one talks about the history and tradition of contemplation, or a contemplative life in the Black church, one has to also then say that those ways of being contemplative are nuanced by denomination, by socioeconomic reality, right? So there's high Black churches, high church, where our African Methodist Episcopal siblings might sing hymns and anthems, and that is a part of their contemplative practice. And then there is all the way over where there is a non-liturgical sense of church and a non-liturgical way of doing church, although their church is always liturgy because it's the work of the people. But you understand what I'm saying? It's less influenced by Eurocentric structure, and where there may be moaning and there may be crying and weeping. And then there is Black Quakerism, where there may be silence. And all of this is the Black church. All of it is nuanced and sophisticated and layered, and shouldn't be lumped into one kind of pot, this melting pot thing. It's not a melting pot, because in a melting pot, everything loses its flavor. Much more like a tossed salad. Everything retains its flavor, but works together.
I so appreciate you painting us that picture, that wide picture of diversity. After you've offered us that scale, where do you either in 2014 when the book was written, or where do you and how do you experience this sense of contemplation in your own experience, in your own place?
Yeah, so I'm still one of Mason's children. So I'm still quite attached to a sense of stillness, a sense of yes, a deep affirmation of the work of spirit. For me, quite honestly, a lot of my contemplation comes in reading. I don't know if you can see well. I'm surrounded by
we see them, yeah.
Because the life of the mind is a life of contemplation. And so I'm always looking for interlocutors who have discovered spirit in multiple ways to be in conversation with.
If you're what I'm hearing, what you're saying is that you are experiencing it through mostly the mind. Is there a place where there's an intersection with body, as Barbara Holmes is talking about?
Oh yes, certainly. We're Pentecostal people. We are people of the body. We're people of movement. We're people of celebration, rejoicing, and dancing, and particularly, even more so for me, post 2014 have always been celebratory, but celebration as an act of resistance. So our church is quite intentional about moving our embodiment as Black and brown folks are constantly under attack. And the refrain is, I can't breathe. The very act of breathing is contemplative, but add to it the movement of your embodiment says to the oppressor, we will not be controlled by fear nor regulated by hypersurveillance. And so we're a dancing, moving, jubilant, celebratory people as a part of our contemplation, where spirit is summoned by our embodiment and our movement, unafraid, unashamed of that part of our culture and our expression that may not be easily interpreted by the dominant culture.
So this embodiment as an act of resistance, as an act of empowerment.
Yes.
And your study. So let's name it right now. You are a theologian. I don't know if that was actually stated outright in your bio, but as if we didn't need to name it with the books around you and your professorships and your bishopric and all of your writing and your prolific writing. You are a theologian. You are speaking to us from understanding of theological norms as you express and experience life. And so I wanted to ask about theology, if we could, for a minute, and if we could zoom out and just ask what is theology? A big part of your life is concerned and engaged with developing, editing, critiquing theology. But for the sake of people who are watching today, what is it? And then from there, we'll move into what does it do?
So theology is the study of, or the articulation of, our understanding of the divine, or our relationship with the divine. The task of the theologian, James Cone would say, is to revise and critique the language of the church. I take it a little further and say to revise and critique the language of the church and the world. Because I reject the idea, or the Western Anglo-Teutonic, that theology is a specific specified topic. It is all of our conversation about the divine. So some of the greatest theologians I know are not academically trained, and yet they have a way of knowing, intuiting the divine, and then they speak about it from that place of intuition. So that's what I think theology is. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So you're just you're taking a much more democratic, egalitarian perspective on theology, that it's intuitive response, a way to articulate a response to the divine. Is that what I heard?
Sure. And to say that there are academically trained theologians who study it as a particular discipline. But they don't own the right to claim theology as a specialized field, because theology belongs to the people that belong to the divine.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does it do? Like, given that anyone can participate, as you've said, doesn't need to be just the realm of professionals or specialists. You have chosen to engage in a life of theological work and reflection. What are you hoping to accomplish as a theologian through this commitment to studying and articulating theology?
Yeah, I am. My goal and my hope as a theologian is to provide specific language around what the ancient text has to say in the current moment, right? So I'm a constructive theologian and not a systematic theologian. So I'm always holding the tension between the ancient text, the sacred text, and the current moment, to ask the question, what might the text have to say to us in this moment? And what might this moment have to say back to the text?
Okay, so you are engaged, and you're talking specifically about Christian scriptures, and
yes,
then Hebrew Bible. Yeah.
Hebrew Bible, Christian scriptures, but I will tell you, I think a real theologian is also in conversation with that which sits outside of its faith tradition that seeks to define God. And so I'm also in conversation with the Quran. I'm also in conversation with, right? Because if these are God claims, then my job is to be in conversation with the God claims. Whether or not they are from my tradition, they are still claims about the divine, and they have to be wrestled with.
Yeah. And your work at Seattle University, you have the gift really of being surrounded by a lot of folks who are also participating in that work and who are very near you and the specialists in those fields. It's amazing. It's an amazing place.
It is an amazing place. It's a wonderful institution and a grand place to both exegete text and to exegete culture and to exegete oneself. I tell my students that their primary text is themselves. Their secondary text is their colleagues and the folks that they're in community with. The tertiary texts are the texts that we offer as books and readings, and they all serve as equal interlocutors. So we are learning ourselves, we are learning our neighbor, and we are learning other authors and writers as we discover our understanding of the divine.
Could you speak a little bit more about that first text of learning yourself?
Yeah, so the work of theology is never separate from the theologian. All theology is self-revelatory. And so until one is true with one's own self, one can't see one's own bias, one's own questions, one's querying, and one will never engage a hermeneutic of hunger or even a hermeneutic of suspicion or let me say it in a non-theological way. One will never engage a true quest for the divine if one is not honest about one's starting place on that quest. That the quest is not universal and the quest is not ubiquitous. The quest is particular. And in that particularity, it becomes existential.
Let's unpack that last phrase. In its particularity, it's existential. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So we read Athanasius, we read Augustine. Let's take Augustine. And we read Augustine maybe around sex and sexuality. And we want to divorce it from his own internal angst around his own human sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And then we try to overlay his theological findings on folks for whom those particularities are not true.
Mm-hmm.
And then we wonder why that theology is uncomfortable, or it doesn't suit our need to be in relationship with the divine, because it is not written in such a way as to speak to a more existential universal, because it is not true in many senses to the particulars of the author of that. It's Martin Luther King writing a letter from a Birmingham jail. It is to say back to liberal mainline theologians who said, you should really wait, and the Spirit will work all of this race stuff out. Well, what was unfair in their theological assumption that Spirit will work it all out was they were not on the underside of oppression. They were on the top side of power and privilege. And power and privilege would say to oppressed people, wait for deliverance. Martin Luther King Jr., being on the underside of power and privilege and representing oppressed people, said it is fraudulent for you to hand us this theology because you are not in the circumstance. And the circumstance dictates that we know God in a different way. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, I really appreciate that articulation of the norms that people are experiencing as their particular place, dictating how that theology comes out and is expressed. And it's really, to me, it's really kind of it's a call to humility and as much self-awareness as one can muster when making claims about the divine or a tradition or what have you. Yeah.
And always to query who is making God claims and who do their God claims benefit. Because this will help us discern whether or not these God claims are viable for the community for which we wish to engage.
Yeah. So let's talk about another capacity, if we want to put it that way, of theology, which is to be able to expose or to assist social justice efforts. We talked about, mentioned this, you might want to have a deeper influence in the book if you were to add a chapter. But I wanted to lift up an example where a video you were in, where you were distinguished, you were talking about homelessness, but you were very clear about wanting to distinguish between a person who is homeless and a person who is unsheltered. So this might not on the surface present itself as theology, but I interpreted your really specific use of language there as a way to make a claim about the dignity of a person, where a word that's so normal, like homeless, it connotates a certain displacement, someone who doesn't belong, they don't have a home. And you went to lengths in this video to say that the word unsheltered is a way of putting their affirmation as a human as a premise, and then going from there to a circumstance that they're in. So I interpret that kind of use of language as public theology.
Indeed, it is, because it goes back to a very theological term, imago Dei, and the sanctity and the sacred worth of every human. It gets at the heart of their worth. And it gets at the heart of Christian, in particular, Christian charity. That Christian charity is a benevolence that doesn't further cripple or further dehumanize or further, right? So here's the thing about saying that someone is homeless. When I then set up a shelter for them, it's easy for me to ask them to divest of all of their belongings to come into this shelter, because you're homeless and these belongings then have no value. But if I know that you are unsheltered and yet you do have home, I see your belongings as a part of your home. Maybe they're pictures of your grandchildren. Maybe they're a shoe that an uncle wore. Maybe it's a coat that belonged to a wife. Whatever it is, these things make for home for you. And you should have the agency to determine what is of value to you. This is an issue of freedom. When we set up our shelters, we often create huge barriers for unsheltered people. We actually cause them to become homeless by trying to engage them in systems that were created with homelessness in mind.
Versus humans that need a place to stay.
That's right.
And that have things that have a different value than people who are sheltered typically assign.
Yes.
Yeah.
We ask ourselves this question often: if your house were to catch on fire, what would you grab on the way out? Right? And we don't think about it on a daily basis because we don't have to.
Okay.
But when one is in a situation that causes quick transience and movement, then one is always thinking about, how will I get my belongings, my home to move with me? Or my sense of home may not even be attached to material things. We think in such capitalistic terms that we've decided that home is based on place and based on things. But really, home is something much deeper. Home is something found internal. Home is an internal orientation. So this question of, are you homeless, really says, do you have agency of internal orientation? Or are you unsheltered?
Yeah. Well, we will not turn to you and ask you which book you would grab on the way out of your house if it were on fire, because that would be too traumatic for me to ask you that.
Yeah, it definitely would be trauma. I don't know.
So you also, in your work, in your theology work that you do, you also are working with theology for social justice in the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
And so I wanted to hold up, recently with the passing of Desmond Tutu, a quote came out where he was saying that he wouldn't want to be in a heaven where gay and queer folk were not permitted to be. And those terms, I think that he was very intentional about taking a construct like heaven and saying that he would opt not to be there if gay and queer folk were not permitted. So very intentionally taking this traditional phrase and using it to make a statement in the present time. And how are you working with related to social justice with the LGBTQ community theologically these days?
So my last book was the Black Lives Matter movement toward an intersectional theology. And I've begun to develop this idea of intersectional theology because I think that what the Black Lives Matter movement had to say to us in its tenets, which were not explicit God claims, they were implicit. But what those tenets were asking us was to take the most marginalized and to begin to see them as fully a part of the beloved community. And when I talk about the most marginalized, folks that have multiple burdens of marginalization within our society, Black, female, lesbian, poor, disabled women, and say to them, you are of sacred worth, created in the image of God. And I think that's what intersectional theology really asks us to do. And it's a reclamation of Pentecost. Pentecostals have not been known for providing space for LGBTQ folks, LGBTQIA plus folks. But real Pentecost, Acts the 2nd chapter, was that they were all in one place with one accord, and that they all heard gospel in their own language. And I have to question whether or not we have a gospel for all to hear in their language, right? Are we speaking in a way that is good news to the individual. And if it is true that Jesus had a preferential for the oppressed, Gustavo Gutierrez, the great Latin liberation theologian, says that God has a preferential option for the poor.
Mm-hmm.
I take it a step further and say God has a preferential option for the oppressed, because oppression does not necessarily always extend to those who are experiencing the effects of poverty. Because when I drive my car down the street, I'm not experiencing the effects of poverty as an individual, but I'm oppressed because I drive a Lincoln. I put a Seattle U license plate holder on my Lincoln as a way to signify to the police that I am justified as a Black man to have the Lincoln. My oppression is not about being poor. My oppression is about being a Black man living in America. And Jesus has a preferential for me. And if Jesus has a preferential for me, Jesus has a preferential for all, which has to include our LGBTQIA community.
Yeah. In that book, you named an implicit theology that's happening in the Black Lives Matter. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that a topic of exploration in the book, or
Yeah, that's what the whole book is about.
That's what the whole book is about.
What are the God claims implied by the 15 original tenets of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Have you had any critique from folks who are organizers in the Black Lives Movement about imposing theology on these tenets?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. What I have had is conversation, because what I say in the book is that my intention is to be a bridge of conversation between the movement and the Black church, and between the Black church and the movement, so they can better understand one another. And if these aren't your God claims, at least this is a door to begin to talk through what those God claims are.
Yeah, how have those conversations been, and what's been the overall feeling or health of those conversations?
I think it's been phenomenal. It's been a fundamentally a joy to be in those conversations. I have learned a lot about many aspects of Black church spaces and the ways in which they see political movements. Many of those spaces haven't been informed by white evangelical fundamentalists, and don't have a liberative lens. My family of origin had a saying, "All your skin folk aren't your kinfolk." See, they were brilliant. And what they were telling me is just because they look like you doesn't mean they share your politics. So I've learned a lot about the politics, and those which are shared and those which are not shared. Yeah, so it's been great. It's been really life-giving to be in those conversations in spaces that agree and spaces that disagree. Yeah,
I really appreciate you being open to having those spaces, because again, like I'm seeing a kind of a thread through some of your work. It really adds validity and dignity to the people who are maybe outside of the church tradition, that you can say the values that I hold, the way that I assess dignity in my tradition, in my church, I offer that to you implicitly. And I also welcome dialogue to talk about what it means that I'm offering that to you.
Yeah. James Cone said that his critics were his best supporters. Really, it's the folks that don't agree with us that cause us to go back to the drawing board and see where we might betray the gospel and where we might portray the gospel more accurately. So those conversations are essential to really developing a very healthy sense of the divine and a healthy sense of self.
I really just appreciate you saying that, because this just seems to be a moment where those invitations to have those kind of hard conversations seem to be going away, or seem to be being discouraged by folks at higher and higher levels. So I'm very happy to hear you say that. Yeah, kind of a tough moment in that particular way of dialogue.
It is.
Yeah. Well, as we begin to wrap up today, I always conclude with asking about hope. And I was wondering how you define hope, Dr. Donaldson, and where are you seeing it and experiencing it today?
I think about this question of hope a lot. And I'm quite honestly torn. And religious leaders aren't supposed to say this. We're supposed to be hope peddlers. But there are moments in which I think that hope is a luxury that keeps us from fighting for justice. That somehow hope often makes us lazy. And then I also hold great hope, because my own eschatology says that the kingdoms of this world is become the kingdom of our Lord and of our Christ. So I have a strange relationship with hope, right? I see it as both a friend and a foe simultaneously. Where I find hope, I'm teaching an undergraduate class this quarter. I've got these 18-year-olds in this class who are fierce justice warriors. And of course, there's some hubris there. There's some arrogance there. There's some youthful zeal. But underneath that, there's a deep commitment to a better world. There's a passion around saving our planet. It's a passion about being inclusive. There's deep anti-racist work being done in their language and their way of being in the world. They're rejecting heterosexism and homophobia. They're throwing off vestiges of Western civilization that are capitalist, imperialist, anti-Black, cis hetero-patriarchy. And they're doing it with joy. And that's hopeful for me. I normally dress like this. But yesterday I went to class with my undergrads in some Adidas, some jeans, and a puffy vest. Because the energy that I get from their very presence is hope for me. And I wanted to come to class in such a way to identify with that generation of world changers, to step out of kind of the way of being that is expected in the academy, and to validate that their way of being is what is here. It's not what's coming, it's what's here. And in a Trumpian era, and listen to me when I say this, we are still in a Trumpian era. Who's president does not change the era that we are in. In a Trumpian era, to have these fierce justice warriors sitting in classrooms all across the globe says to me, whether I see it or not, the times they are changing. And that's where I find hope.
Thank you for that. I know there's a lot of changes happening at the School of Theology and Ministry at Seattle University, but if I can have a gratitude in any of those changes, it's that you are having this exposure to these young people, and you're a place where you can share your gifts and your passion and your wisdom with them. That gives me hope hearing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a joy to be with you today.
It's been a joy to be with you.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you next. We'll try to get together and do lunch sometime soon, and just
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate you. And I will post this. I'll post ways so people can follow your work on our Facebook page. And again, thanks to our guest today, Dr. Edward Donalson, for joining us on this edition of Lean In Olympia. And again, you can check out past episodes on our website at interfaith-works.org, our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and just stay connected on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month when we do this each time at noon. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you to our guest. Appreciate you. Yeah, and we'll be well, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Well, blessings.